On the morning of April 3, 1965, the skies over North Vietnam were a stage for a drama that would redefine the rules of aerial combat. Below the formidable Hanoi Bridge, a critical artery of the North Vietnamese supply line stood defiantly. Above a powerful strike package of American fighter bombers, including Vought F-80 Crusaders and Republic F-105 Thunderchiefs, wheeled in the clear, high-altitude air, confident in their technological supremacy. Their mission was simple: to sever this vital link. For the American pilots, visibility was excellent above 10,000 feet, but a thick, humid haze clung to the landscape below 5,000 feet, shrouding the vibrant green rice paddies and winding rivers in a milky veil. It was from within this veil that history was about to be made. Unseen and unheard, a flight of 4 silver jets from the Vietnamese People's Air Force VPAF tore across the treetops. They were Mikoyan Gurevich Mig-17s, a design many Western analysts already considered obsolete. Flying at a breathtakingly low 1,000 feet, they used the terrain and the haze as their allies invisible to the American aircraft circling far above. As a pair of F-80 Crusaders pulled up their ordnance expended on the bridge, the trap was sprung. The MiGs, like predators emerging from the shadows, pounced. Lieutenant Pham Ngoc Lan, leading the flight, closed in on one of the Crusaders. The staccato bark of his 3 cannons, 137mm and 223mm, ripped through the air. A string of explosive shells hammered the American jet. To the VPAF pilots, it appeared as if the F-8 had disintegrated in a flash of fire as it veered violently downwards. Lan's wingman, Phan Van Tuc, engaged the second Crusader, unleashing another volley. In the heat and confusion of this first clash, the North Vietnamese pilots claimed 2 decisive victories, a momentous achievement for their fledgling air force. In reality, the American record showed a different outcome. Neither Crusader was shot down. The one piloted by Commander Spence Thomas was severely damaged and had to make an emergency landing at Da Nang. But the discrepancy in claims was secondary to the earth-shattering significance of the event. This was the VPAF's audacious debut on the world stage. It was a declaration that the skies over North Vietnam would not be an uncontested American sanctuary. The engagement marked the first time that the small subsonic Mig-17 had purposefully intercepted and engaged a state-of-the-art American supersonic strike package. A legend was born in that hazy sky over Thanh Hoa, the legend of the Silver Swallow of Hanoi. This was the story of how a seemingly outmoded fighter in the hands of determined and resourceful pilots would challenge the most powerful air force on the planet, not through equal technology, but through courage, ingenuity, and a profound understanding of its own strengths and its adversaries' weaknesses. To understand the MiG-17's significance in Vietnam, one must first look back to its predecessor and the conflict that shaped it, the MiG-15 and the Korean War. The swept-wing MiG-15 had been a profound shock to the West when it appeared over the Yalu River. It was fast-climbed like a rocket and was armed with devastating cannons that could tear an American B-29 superfortress apart with a single well-placed burst. It was more than a match for the first generation of American straight-wing jets like the F-80 Shooting Star and F-84 Thunderjet. Only the arrival of the superb F-86 Sabre, with its own swept-wing design and better-trained pilots, could level the playing field, leading to the famous duels in MiG Alley. However, the crucible of combat in Korea also revealed the MiG-15's limitations. As pilots pushed the aircraft towards the speed of sound Mach 1, it exhibited dangerous handling characteristics. The aircraft would become unstable, prone to uncontrollable pitching, or Mach Tuk Kwachnubanuk, a terrifying phenomenon where the nose would dive steeply as shock waves formed over the wings. This effectively limited its combat speed and made it difficult to escape from a diving F-86. The Mikoyan Gurevich Design Bureau, the creators of the MiG-15, were acutely aware of these shortcomings. Even as the Korean War raged, they were working on a successor. Their goal was not a revolutionary leap forward, but a deep and intelligent evolution. The result was the I-330, a prototype that would become the MiG-17. Codenamed Fresco by NATO, the MiG-17 was a masterful refinement of a proven concept. At first glance, it looked remarkably similar to its older sibling, but the differences were critical. The most significant aerodynamic improvement was a new thinner wing. It featured a compound sweep with a sharper 45-degree angle on the inboard section and a gentler 42-degree angle on the outboard section. This subtle change combined with the addition of 3 prominent wing fences. On each wing, the MiG-15 had 2 dramatically improved airflow at transonic speeds. These fences prevented air from sliding sideways along the wing towards the tips, a phenomenon that could cause a loss of aileron control. The fuselage was also lengthened slightly to improve aerodynamic stability. The heart of the early MiG-17 remained the Klimov VK-1 engine, a Soviet-developed reverse-engineered copy of the British Rolls-Royce Nini centrifugal flow turbojet. It was a robust and reliable power plant, but it provided no more thrust than the engine in the late-model MiG-15s. The genius of the MiG-17's design was that all its enhanced performance, its higher critical Mach number, and improved stability was achieved through purely aerodynamic refinement, without a single additional pound of thrust. The true game-changer, however, came with the introduction of the MiG-17F Fresco C. This variant incorporated the Klimov VK-1F engine, which was equipped with a crucial piece of technology, an afterburner. By injecting raw fuel directly into the engine's hot exhaust stream, the afterburner provided a short but massive boost in thrust, increasing it by nearly 30%. This dramatically improved the aircraft's rate of climb acceleration and sustained turn performance, all vital metrics in a dogfight. It was this afterburning MiG-17F that would become the iconic workhorse of the VPAF. The MiG-17's armament philosophy was a direct inheritance from World War II Soviet doctrine: favor heavy-hitting, slow-firing cannons over the high-volume machine guns preferred by the Americans. It carried a formidable trio of guns in its nose, one 37mm Nudelman N-37 cannon with 40 rounds and two 23mm Nudelman Richter NR-23 cannons with 80 rounds per gun. The N-37 fired a shell the size of a milk bottle, capable of obliterating an enemy aircraft with a single hit. The NR-23s provided a higher rate of fire for targeting. However, this weapon system had its drawbacks. The slow rate of fire and differing ballistic trajectories of the two cannon types made gunnery a difficult skill to master. Pilots had only a few seconds of firing time before their ammunition was spent. It was an all-or-nothing weapon demanding precision and a steady hand. Later, the Soviets developed the MiG-17 PF Fresco D, an all-weather interceptor variant equipped with the Izumrud Emerald radar in its nose cone. This version, armed only with cannons, was designed to be guided by ground control to intercept Western bombers at night or in bad weather. A further development, the MiG-17 PFU removed the cannons entirely and armed the interceptor with 4 of the USSR's first air-to-air guided missiles, the K-5A1 Alkali. By the mid-1960s, as supersonic missile-armed fighters like the MiG-21 and the American F-4 Phantom II were entering service, the Soviet Air Forces considered the MiG-17 obsolete. It was a day fighter from a bygone era, a relic of the early jet age. But for a small agrarian nation like North Vietnam facing an existential threat from the air, the obsolete MiG-17 was about to become the perfect tool for an asymmetric war, forging an air force from scratch. The birth of the VPAF. In the early 1960s, North Vietnam possessed no meaningful air force. Its air defense was a patchwork of anti-aircraft artillery. President Ho Chi Minh and General Von Nguyen Giap understood that to defend their nation against the inevitable escalation of American air power, they needed an air arm. With the ideological and material backing of their communist allies, they embarked on an ambitious program. In 1960, the best and brightest young men were selected and sent abroad for a journey that would transform them from farmers and students into jet fighter pilots. 52 of these pilot candidates traveled to the People's Republic of China and the Soviet Union to begin their rigorous training. They learned to fly in basic trainers before graduating to the 2-seat MiG-15 UTI and finally the single-seat MiG-17. They learned not just the mechanics of flight, but also the Soviet doctrine of air combat, which emphasized strict adherence to ground-controlled intercept. Unlike the more independent and flexible tactics favored by Western pilots, the Soviet model treated the pilot as the tip of the spear guided into a perfect attack position by a vast network of ground-based radar controllers who had a complete God's-eye view of the battlefield. As these pilots began to return home in 1962, their training complete, Moscow marked the occasion with a significant gesture. On February 3, 1964, a shipment of 36 combat-ready Mig-17F fighters and a number of Mig-15 UTI trainers arrived in Hanoi. These aircraft formed the nucleus of the VPAF's first fighter unit, the 921st Fighter Regiment, which proudly bore the name Sao Do, Red Star. The establishment of this regiment was a moment of immense national pride, a symbol of Vietnam's determination to control its own destiny and defend its own sky. However, possessing the aircraft was only half the battle. The challenges facing the VPAF were monumental. North Vietnam had to build a modern air defense system almost entirely from scratch. The country's unique geography, long and narrow, only 43 miles wide in some places, meant that American strike packages flying in from carriers in the Gulf of Tonkin or from bases in Thailand could reach critical targets with terrifyingly little warning. Furthermore, the dense jungle-covered mountains and rugged terrain made deploying and maintaining a comprehensive radar network a logistical nightmare. The early radar systems provided by the Soviets and Chinese had limited range and were vulnerable to the sophisticated electronic countermeasures employed by the Americans. To compensate for these technological gaps, the North Vietnamese established a brilliant, if rudimentary, early warning system. Thousands of observers were posted in watchtowers and on hilltops across the country equipped with little more than binoculars, telephones, and an unshakable resolve. Their reports, relayed through a complex command chain, often provided the first crucial alert of an inbound raid, giving the MiGs just enough time to scramble. This reliance on visual spotting and a limited radar picture meant that VPAF pilots often had to locate their targets with their own eyes, a task made incredibly difficult by the high speeds of jet combat and the vastness of the sky. The GCI controllers became their lifeline, their unseen partners in the cockpit, vectoring them toward the enemy and warning them of unseen threats. It was a system born of necessity, blending modern technology with human ingenuity. The guerrilla in the sky, a doctrine of asymmetric warfare. The commanders of the VPAF were pragmatists. They knew they could never hope to challenge the United States Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps on equal terms. The Americans possessed overwhelming numerical superiority, with hundreds of advanced aircraft operating from a constellation of airbases and aircraft carriers. Their pilots were exceptionally well trained, with many being veterans of World War II and Korea. To send their precious few MiGs into open symmetric combat against such a force would be suicide. One VPAF pilot, in a moment of desperate patriotism, even suggested suicide attacks to offset the American advantage. But Hanoi's leadership, guided by the same strategic patience and cunning that defined their ground war, chose a different path. They would not fight the Americans' war. They would force the Americans to fight theirs. They developed a doctrine of aerial guerrilla warfare. This doctrine was built around a sophisticated understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of both their own aircraft and those of their enemy. Its greatest asset was its phenomenal maneuverability at low altitudes and subsonic speeds. With a low wing loading and simple responsive controls, the Mig-17 could turn inside any American fighter it faced. Its turning radius was incredibly tight, allowing it to get on the six of a faster but less agile opponent in a classic dogfight. Its small size and silver paint scheme made it difficult to see, especially against the hazy jungle canopy or a bright, cloudy sky. It was also a simple, rugged machine, easy to maintain and able to operate from rough, hastily prepared airfields. Finally, its cannon armament, while difficult to use, was devastatingly effective at the close ranges where the Mig-17 excelled. The Mig-17 was fundamentally a 1950s design. It lacked an onboard radar in most versions, making it utterly dependent on GCI for finding the enemy. It had no guided missiles, Its acceleration was sluggish compared to its American counterparts, and its top speed was subsonic in level flight. It was a poor performer at high altitudes, where the air was thin and its engine struggled. Its limited fuel capacity gave it a very short combat endurance, often measured in mere minutes. The MiG-17's primary opponents were the F-4 Phantom II and the F-105 Thunderchief. The Phantom was the epitome of 1960s American air power. A massive twin-engine beast, it was bristling with technology. It possessed a powerful airborne radar that could detect targets from miles away, and it was armed with a formidable array of guided missiles, the long-range radar-guided AIM-7 Sparrow and the short-range heat-seeking AIM-9 Sidewinder. It had a phenomenal thrust-to-weight ratio, allowing it to climb and accelerate vertically. Its top speed was more than twice the speed of sound. However, the early models sent to Vietnam had a critical flaw born of the belief that the era of the dogfight was over. They had no internal cannon. Their complex missiles were often unreliable in the heat and humidity of Southeast Asia, and had minimum engagement ranges, making them useless in a close-quarters knife fight. Furthermore, its powerful J-79 engines produced thick trails of black smoke, making it visible from miles away. It was a thoroughbred racehorse, not a nimble acrobat. In a slow-speed turning fight, it was at a distinct disadvantage. The F-105 was the USAF's primary strike bomber for much of the war. It was incredibly fast at low altitude and could carry a colossal bomb load. It was built like a tank and could absorb significant damage. However, it was designed to deliver bombs, not to dogfight. Pilots described its handling as being like a flying brick. Once it had released its bombs and was engaged by a nimble fighter like the MiG-17, it was extremely vulnerable. The VPAF's strategy was to exploit this stark mismatch in design philosophies. They would use GCI to vector their MiG-17s into ambush positions, staying low to avoid radar detection. They would launch high-speed slashing attacks on the bomb-laden F-105s, forcing them to jettison their ordnance and abort their mission. If engaged by the F-4 escorts, the MiG pilot's instructions were clear bleed-off speed and drag the Phantoms into a low-altitude slow-speed turning contest. They would avoid energy-sapping vertical maneuvers, where the F-4's superior power was supreme, and instead use the horizontal plane to get inside the Phantom's wide turning circle. The goal was to survive the initial missile barrage from the F-4s and close to cannon range, where the MiG-17 was king. The primary mission was not always to shoot down American planes, but to disrupt the bombing raids and protect the homeland. A mission where the bombers were forced to turn back was a strategic victory, regardless of kill counts. The grinding war, Rolling Thunder and the learning curve. Following the opening skirmishes in April 1965, the air war escalated dramatically with the launch of OperationRollingThunder, a sustained bombing campaign against North Vietnam. For the nascent VPAF, the summer of 1965 was a brutal learning period. The highly skilled American pilots, flying in large, well-coordinated formations, inflicted heavy losses on the inexperienced Vietnamese. Hanoi attributed these losses to a lack of combat experience, inferior hardware, and an initial overconfidence that was quickly tempered by the harsh realities of war. The Americans, too, were learning and adapting. They introduced the Lockheed EC-121D Warning Star, an airborne early warning and control aircraft that could detect the low-flying MiGs and provide a crucial counter to the VPAF's GCI advantage. They developed new tactics, such as establishing MiG screens or barrier combat air patrols of F-4s to sweep ahead of the strike force and engage the interceptors. Despite these measures, the MiGs remained a persistent and deadly threat. In 1965 alone, the VPAF scrambled its fighters 156 times and against overwhelming odds claimed 15 kills. Of course, they also had casualties. Like in this air battle, North Vietnam lost 3 pilots. At 10:22 a.m. on April 4, 1965, North Vietnam's attack squadron received orders to take off from Noi Bai Air Base, flying along the Trong Son mountain range toward the south. As they entered Thanh Hoa province, at low altitude, pilot Tran Thanh and his comrades suddenly spotted a formation of F-105s flying in standard formation, preparing to bomb Ham Rong Bridge. Due to carrying heavy bomb loads and focusing on ground targets, the F-105s had slowed down and become less maneuverable. Squadron leader Tran Han immediately ordered a maneuver to cut the turn radius and close in on the target. The distance quickly narrowed. From a position behind and slightly below the target, about 300 meters away, Tran Han squeezed the trigger, unleashing bursts from his cannons. The Thunderchief was hit, burst into flames, and plunged to the ground. At the same time, the Mig-17 piloted by Lê Minh Hoan flying behind also fought bravely and successfully downed another F-105 over Sam Son. Immediately, 4 enemy FEF-100 escort fighters swooped in to surround and attack the Mig-17 formation. Sensing the enemy closing in, Tran Han judged that missiles had been launched. He quickly executed a climb, then pulled sharply before diving straight down. As expected, at a 30-degree descent, he saw 2 green streaks flash past AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles touted by the U.S. Air Force as never-miss weapons. Breaking free from the encirclement, Tran Han continued to maneuver to evade enemy fire. Minutes later, his fuel gauge indicated empty. The aircraft could not return to base and did not have enough fuel to land at any nearby airfield. He descended gradually, the MiG losing altitude in free fall. Headquarters ordered him to eject and parachute to safety. However, Tran Han poured all his effort into controlling the Mig-17 as it plunged from the sky. Spotting a flat rice field ahead, he chose not to deploy the landing gear, allowing the aircraft to skid in on its belly. After the landing, Tran Han collapsed in the cockpit, not knowing how long he had been unconscious. When he awoke, he found himself surrounded by a large crowd of villagers. At that moment, squadron leader Tran Han was still unaware that his 3 comrades, after a fierce dogfight against overwhelming enemy numbers, had heroically fallen. The uneven battle had claimed the lives of 3 young pilots from the squadron. Throughout 1966 and 1967, the war intensified. The Americans relentlessly attacked power plants, industrial sites, and transportation routes around the critical centers of Hanoi and Haiphong. To make the best use of their limited number of fighters, the VPAF concentrated its forces on defending these key areas. They could not respond to every raid, so they had to choose their battles carefully, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. During this period, the VPAF pilots honed their skills to a razor's edge. They became masters of their aircraft and the unique combat environment. Pilots like Nguyen Van Bay, a farmer-turned-ace who claimed 7 victories flying the Mig-17 and never lost a dogfight, became national heroes. They demonstrated that the man in the cockpit was as important, if not more so, than the machine he flew. The psychological impact on American pilots was profound. Every mission over the North carried the constant nerve-wracking threat of a surprise attack from a Silver Swallow appearing suddenly on their 6 o'clock. This threat, combined with the world's densest network of surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft artillery, made the skies over Hanoi the most dangerous combat environment in the world. A fresco at sea and the final fury of linebacker. While primarily an interceptor, the versatile MiG-17 was also adapted for a new audacious role. In 1971, with the air war in a lull, Hanoi began training a special cadre of 10 pilots from the 923rd Yen Thi Fighter Regiment for ground and maritime attack missions. This culminated in one of the most remarkable engagements of the war. On April 19, 1972, during what became known as the Battle of Dong Hoi VPAF, MiG-17s conducted a coordinated attack on a powerful U.S. 7th Fleet Task Force. The American force included the guided missile cruiser USS Oklahoma City and several destroyers. It was the first time since World War II that U.S. warships had faced a direct conventional air attack. In a daring low-level pass, a MiG-17 piloted by Lê Xuan Di scored a direct hit on the destroyer USS Higbee with a 500-pound bomb destroying its aft 5-inch gun mount. Another MiG made several runs on the flagship Oklahoma City, but narrowly missed. While one MiG was shot down by a Terrier surface-to-air missile from the USS Starrett, the mission was a stunning propaganda and psychological victory. It demonstrated a level of audacity and flexibility that shocked the U.S. Navy. The air war reached its violent crescendo in May 1972 with the launch of Operation Linebacker, a massive bombing effort to halt the North Vietnamese Easter offensive. May 10, 1972, saw one of the largest single air battles of the entire war. The U.S. flew 414 sorties that day, targeting bridges and infrastructure. In response, the VPAF put up every available fighter. 4 MiG-17s from the 923rd Squadron scrambled to protect a bridgehead and engage the American attackers. Throughout the day, VPAF MiGs, including both the older MiG-17s and the more advanced supersonic MiG-21s, tangled with waves of American jets. By this stage of the war, the VPAF had developed sophisticated combined arms tactics. The nimble MiG-17s would often be sent in low to engage the F-4 escorts, drawing them into a turning dogfight and pulling them out of position. This would open a window for the faster missile-armed MiG-21s to dive from high altitude and attack the now vulnerable F-105 and F-4 bombers. On that day alone, VPAF interceptor pilots were credited with downing several U.S. aircraft, including 2 F-4s, demonstrating their continued lethality even in the face of overwhelming numbers. And also, on October 5, 1972, in the sky of North Vietnam, a breathtaking 3-minute air battle took place between the first ace pilot of the U.S. Navy and a North Vietnamese pilot with only over 200 hours of flight time. On that day, Randy Duke Cunningham, who would later become America's first ace pilot of the Vietnam War, was heading out to sea after completing his mission. Unexpectedly, he encountered a MiG-17 flying in the opposite direction. The pilot was Tra Van Kim, a young Vietnamese People's Air Force pilot. This was also his very first combat mission. Upon spotting the approaching F-4, Phantom Kim immediately opened fire. Taken by surprise, but with skilled handling, Cunningham pulled his F-4 straight up. He believed the MiG-17 would not dare to follow and would turn back toward Hanoi. However, Tra Van Kim did the unexpected. He pulled straight up after the Phantom. The two aircraft shot upward into the sky, engaging in a fierce dogfight in a tight airspace. At times, their cockpits were so close that the two pilots could clearly see each other's faces. Kim stayed on Cunningham's tail, trying to fire his cannons whenever possible. Cunningham was sweating constantly, maneuvering and turning sharply to shake off the MiG-17. He later admitted he was nearly shot down twice by Kim. The intense battle lasted more than 3 minutes, one of the longest dogfights in history. On the third dive, Cunningham used his technical advantage to suddenly slow down. The MiG-17 lost speed overshot and was hit by a missile from the F-4. Losing both speed and altitude, Kiem's aircraft crashed. He was killed in action at the age of 26 in his very first air battle. After breaking free, Cunningham's F-4 reached the coastline but ran out of fuel due to the prolonged fight with Kim. Moments later, it was shot down by Vietnamese anti-aircraft fire. Cunningham was ejected and rescued by the U.S. Navy. A dogfight that Cunningham will never forget. Even after many years, when he returned to Vietnam, standing in front of the burial place of his old opponent, he was still extremely emotional, remembering those 3 minutes of the past. There is still so much to say about the war, even though it ended a long time ago. Legacy of the Silver Swallow. When the Paris Peace Accords were signed on January 27, 1973, ending direct U.S. military involvement, the relentless American airstrikes ceased. The VPAF, battered but unbowed, began to rebuild. The MiG-17 pilots of the 921st and 923rd Squadrons claimed a remarkable 71 aerial victories against a wide range of American aircraft between 1965 and 1972. In turn, U.S. sources confirmed the loss of 61 MiG-17s in air-to-air combat. 2 VPAF MiG-17 pilots, Lu Hui Chao and Le Hai, were each credited as aces with 6 victories. These numbers, while impressive, do not tell the whole story. The true legacy of the MiG-17 in Vietnam is not found in kill ratios, which are notoriously difficult to verify and often misleading. Its legacy lies in its strategic impact. The MiG-17, an underdog fighter, became a powerful symbol of national resistance. It allowed a small nation to challenge a superpower in its own skies, imposing a real and significant cost for every bombing mission. Its effectiveness forced the U.S. military to fundamentally reevaluate its air combat doctrine. The shock of nimble MiGs outturning and downing multi-million-dollar Phantoms led directly to the creation of the U.S. Navy's Top Gun School and the Air Force's Red Flag exercises, which re-emphasized the lost art of dogfighting. The F-4 Phantom was retrofitted with an internal cannon, a direct admission that the era of the close-in fight was far from over. The venerable MiG-17 remained in frontline service with the VPAF until the late 1970s, when its interception duties were fully handed over to the MiG-21. It was then relegated to ground attack and training roles, its sturdy airframe and forgiving handling, making it an excellent platform for new pilots. The last of Vietnam's Silver Swallows were finally retired in the early 1980s, their mission complete. In the grand chronicle of aviation history, the Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-17 is often overshadowed by more technologically advanced or famous aircraft. It was not the fastest, the highest flying, or the most powerfully armed fighter of its time. Yet in the humid skies of Southeast Asia, it carved out a unique and enduring legend. In the hands of the brave and highly skilled pilots of the Vietnamese People's Air Force, this simple, rugged, and agile jet became more than just a machine of war. It became a David against Goliath, a testament to the timeless principle that victory in combat is decided not by technology alone, but by the will, the courage, and the ingenuity of the human spirit.